Welcome back to the Dynasty Rewind YouTube channel. My name is Bob Van, and today we're diving into the Carson Wentz injury news and the impact of it. So basically, Carson Wentz is going to be out for 5 to 12 weeks with a foot injury. Not great when you're a quarterback and you need to throw from your feet. So looking at the best case scenario, he's set to return at that 5-week mark, which puts him back just in time for the start of the regular season. I think that's a pretty optimistic take. I don't honestly see him returning that early. I'd be concerned that it's going to be closer to that 12-week range, which is obviously not something we want to hear. As somebody who has a lot of Carson Wentz shares in best ball, I'm not wild about it, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. We have to look at the situation for what it's worth. So best case scenario, like I said, starting week 1. The one thing to note, players returning from injury usually don't perform that well. They're usually not in their same rhythm. And who knows, maybe the Colts decide to sit him a couple extra weeks just to be safe. But if you start getting into that 12-week range, the question arises, who's going to start at quarterback? So right now, the only other quarterback that they have really qualified to start on their team, in my opinion, is Jacob Eason. I know there was a lot of hype on him last season. I was somebody who liked him as a prospect. Obviously, he fell in the draft. Not a great look when you want a guy to break out early in his career. So I think for now, the plan is to roll forward with Jacob Eason. Whether or not that remains the case is yet to be seen. There is the possibility of them trading for a veteran quarterback. While I don't see that as very likely, especially if Wentz is supposed to be back within the first 2 weeks of the season, quarterbacks on the table most likely are Nick Foles, Marcus Mariota, and Gardner Minshew. Now, the Colts organization has shot down religiously the idea of Nick Foles being brought into Indy, which I think is good when you have the history like Nick Foles and Carson Wentz does. I think it's good to just keep that guy out of the building, even though it might be a good option for your team. Then we look to Marcus Mariota, somebody who the Raiders have kind of been trying to pawn off here and there. I think the Mariota trade is a little less likely solely because of the cap situation Marcus Mariota would bring. He's a little more expensive than Gardner Minshew, but could be one of those cases where Las Vegas actually tries to work out the contract where they eat some of the cap hit and then Indy picks up the rest. Then when you look at Gardner Minshew, it could be a great opportunity for him to get some starts early in the season on a brand new team and basically give him an opportunity to strut his stuff as what could be a starting quarterback in the league, especially going into a contract year for him. Wouldn't be the worst thing for his situation. However, the Colts are adamant that Jacob Eason's the guy for now, and I think they're fine with him taking reps in camp. I don't think they feel the need to really bring in a quarterback yet. However, that could change depending on the Wentz news as it comes out. So how does that impact the wide receiver room? Personally, I am out on all of these guys. I was a guy that was really high on T.Y. coming into the season. Personally, I'm just really puts a damper on T.Y. Hilton's value coming into the draft season. If Wentz is going to miss any time early on in the season, it's just not going to do well for T.Y. on the year. Then when you look at a guy like Michael Pittman, somebody who I wasn't really high on to begin with this offseason, I just don't know if he's ready to take the next step. So I'm pretty much out on him at his draft cost. He's fairly expensive for what I think he's worth projected value-wise, but just not somebody I feel comfortable drafting when I think there's better options on the board. Then you look at Paris Campbell, a guy who hasn't been able to stay healthy for the first 2 years of his career. Another guy I'm just really out on. I'm not a huge fan of this wide receiver room. As you can tell with Carson Wentz not there, you saw what they were like with Philip Rivers last year, just not explosive, weren't able to get the ball downfield. I'm hopeful Carson Wentz comes back early. I'm just concerned at how good he's going to be right out of the gate. So for me personally, I don't want to draft any of these wide receivers. If anything, you might be able to grab them on waivers after Wentz is back. You might be able to trade for them on the cheap if Wentz doesn't come back right away from another team who decided to draft him for next to nothing. But for me, I don't really want any part of this wide receiver room anymore. In Dynasty, on the other hand, hold him. You're not going to get good value for him at this point anyway. Now let's look at the running back room. When it comes to Jonathan Taylor, I think stocks are up for this guy. There's no reason that the Colts shouldn't try to lean on their run game as much as they possibly can. There's no reason they shouldn't try to use Jonathan Taylor more and use running backs in this system. They have a great offensive line and a great scheme to run them in. They should really just use their offensive line to just mollywop guys at the line of scrimmage. So when it comes to JT, I'm all in at his price. Honestly, I think his stocks are up. Then when you go to Nyheim Hines, you would think his value would dip as a more of a pass catching back. They don't really have a great passer right now, but if you think about it honestly, Nyheim Hines can be a check down weapon at this point with a quarterback who's going to be looking to take the check down. He's not going to be necessarily willing to make the risk downfield. So Hines is a guy I'm actually going to be in on. He's a guy whose draft value is probably going to rise simply because his ADP is likely to drop in this case. Simply with all this news, his perceived value is going to fall. So somebody to target later in drafts, in my opinion. Then when you look at Marlon Mack, just somebody I'm out on with his injury last year. I don't think he's going to be all the way back. There are camp videos coming out of him looking really good in camp. But to me, they had a video of him running a drill right after Jonathan Taylor, and it just didn't look right to me. He didn't look nearly as explosive as Jonathan Taylor did. And while there's an age difference there, obviously one's coming off a serious injury, just not somebody I really want to buy into. He's super cheap, so you can still take your shot on him if you want. So then let's look at that tight end room, who I'm really was never a fan of this season. First off, in like the tight end one on the team, you're looking at Jack Doyle, an older vet who is on the tail end of his career, in my opinion, and he struggled to stay healthy the last 2 seasons. However, when you look at the situation, it's more than likely he's going to get first run simply because he's more reliable, he's a safer player, and understands the playbook a heck of a lot better. Then you have Mo Alley Cox, a Twitter darling, a fantasy darling, a dynasty darling, a guy who just really hasn't broken out like people want him to. I mean, I get he's 6'7" or whatever the heck he is. He's a big dude, but unfortunately, he just hasn't been able to put it together, or he hasn't been able to, or allowed to, however you want to put it. He hasn't amassed fantasy value for anybody yet, aside from a couple weeks here and there over his career. And for me, it might just be a guy that just doesn't pan out, and that's unfortunate, but at the end of the day, you have to look at it for what it is. And then you have Kylen Granson, who I think is in this tight end room probably most impacted solely because of the fact of I think the less stability you have in this offense right now with possibly a completely different quarterback than they were planning on heading into the season with, they're going to want players that are more stable and more reliable and understand the playbook more and are blocking and helping and contributing more than a rookie tight end would. So Kylen Granson, I think, is going to end up sitting a little longer than people like. He's another, dynasty darling, so to speak. If you have these guys in dynasty, I'm not cutting them. I'm just kind of holding them. You're not trading them because you're not going to get appropriate value. So leave Kylen Granson on your taxi squad and just let the rest roll. One interesting tweet of note that I happened to find when I was looking through Carson Wentz injury news is this tweet from My Sports Update, basically highlighting the Colts' career of downplaying injuries. And so as you can see, downplayed Peyton's injury, downplayed Luck's shoulder injury in 17, downplayed Luck's ankle injury in 19, and now they've already started downplaying these injuries. Well, I don't necessarily think this is a blueprint. I think it's more of just an exception to the rule. Teams always will downplay injuries. They don't want to alarm fans. They don't want to tip their hand if they are looking to trade or do anything like that. But it is something to think about that this could be a, kind of a bleak sign of things to come. The last thing I want to note is something that I happen to remember from the Wentz trade conditions. Colts second round pick that they sent in the deal to Philly can become a first round pick if and only if Wentz plays 75% of the snaps, or if he plays 70% of the snaps and the Colts make the playoffs. So if he were to miss about a third of the season, that essentially puts them in a situation where he would play less than 70% of the snaps, and that team is dang good enough where they could probably not have him for that part of the season, and their defense would be able to win games essentially if their offense could do anything. So it's just kind of interesting if they're almost being incentivized to sit Wentz, which I think is just very interesting to me. So I think it's one thing that maybe there is a little more at play here. I'm not saying they're going to just intentionally sit him, but maybe they let him take a week or two more off if they feel the need. So overall, I'm not drafting Carson Wentz right now. I don't want him in a best ball league. You could take him late, but I'm not taking him unless he's my third quarterback. I don't want to draft a guy who's already injured. Take that as a huge note in your best ball drafts. Don't draft people that are already injured or have any type of injury bug going on. Soft tissue injuries ramp up in the preseason, so I can only imagine that'll be the case for others as we get to the closer to the season. So stay away from injured players. Trust me, you don't need help finding injuries. When it comes to that running back room, I'm all in on Jonathan Taylor. I have no issues with drafting him. Nyheim Hines, his value is probably going to be on the rise since the ADP is likely to fall. Marlon Mack, I don't want anything to do with personally. When it comes to the wide receiver room, I'm out on them, sadly. I'm out on T.Y. He's been my offseason darling, one of my favorite old man players, quote unquote, to target in my drafts. But when it comes to this, I just can't draft him anymore. Then when you look at that tight end room, again, I'm out on these guys too. They are pretty cheap in drafts, so if you feel higher than me on any of these guys, you can feel free to grab them. As I mentioned, they do come at a pretty cheap cost. So thank you all so much for watching. I do hope this helped you kind of sort out the drama with the Carson Wentz injury. Thanks so much for watching. I do hope this helped you kind of sort through the Carson Wentz injury drama. Stay tuned and subscribe to the channel. I'll be here pretty much anytime news breaks. Anything that's going to seriously impact your team, your dynasty shares, your drafting outlook, stuff like that. I'll be here to help you guys out. Despite a terrible situation, I do hope this helped. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Check out these other videos. I'd really appreciate it. Comment down below, what are you doing with your Carson Wentz shares? And are you still in on any of the wide receivers on this team? As always, thanks so much for watching. From me, Bob Van, I am out.